Long before modern tools shaped stone with precision, people were already building on a scale that still raises questions. Across deserts, hills, and coastlines, ancient structures remain, engineered with intent, accuracy, and purpose. Many of them were created without technologies we consider essential today. Who built these places and how did they achieve results that still resist simple explanation? By looking closely at what survives, stone, layout, and landscape, we can begin to understand what these structures reveal about Tinkinswood Burial Chamber. Tinkinswood Burial Chamber sits quietly in the countryside of South Wales, not far from modern roads and houses, yet it feels completely detached from the world around it. There's nothing dramatic about its setting, no attempt to draw attention, and no sense that this place was ever meant to be impressive at first glance. It simply exists, settled into the land, unchanged in any meaningful way for thousands of years. What stands here today is a stone chamber dominated by a single massive capstone. The stone is larger and heavier than any used at Stonehenge, weighing close to 40 tons, yet it rests with a sense of calm rather than tension. It has remained in place for over 5,000 years, without mortar, without metal reinforcement, and without any modern engineering. Its stability comes from careful placement, patience, and an understanding of balance that was learned through experience rather than calculation. Originally, this stone chamber was not visible at all. It was enclosed within a long earthen mound that blended into the surrounding landscape. From a distance, there would have been little to suggest that anything significant lay beneath the surface. This was not a monument designed to announce itself. It was a place that required knowledge to reach, a place people returned to intentionally rather than stumbled upon. That detail alone reveals something important about the people who built it. Tinkinswood was not created as a landmark for strangers or outsiders. It was built for a community that understood its purpose and returned to it again and again over long periods of time. The chamber was part of their lived world, not a symbol meant for display. Archaeological excavations show that the chamber was used repeatedly over generations. Inside, the remains of men, women, and children were found together, not separated by age, status, or gender. These were not individual burials sealed once and forgotten. Bones were moved, rearranged, and placed back into the chamber as new burials took place. The dead were not removed from community life, they remained present within it. For the people who lived here, death was not treated as a final separation. It was another stage within an ongoing cycle. Ancestors were remembered physically, not abstractly, and the burial chamber served as a point of continuity rather than closure. The experience of entering the chamber reinforces this idea. The space is low and enclosed, and the ceiling presses down gently rather than dramatically. Light fades quickly, and sound becomes softer, as if the outside world is slowly being filtered out. This effect is not accidental. The structure was designed to change how a person feels when entering it, encouraging stillness and attention rather than movement or conversation. The chamber faces roughly east, toward the direction of the rising sun. While it is not aligned with exact astronomical precision, the orientation still carries meaning. Morning light, renewal, and return were clearly important ideas for early farming communities whose lives depended on seasonal cycles. Even in burial, these themes remain present. What is striking about Tinkinswood is what it does not contain. There are no carvings, no symbols, and no decorative elements carved into the stone. Meaning here was not explained visually or verbally. It was understood through participation and repetition. People learned what this place meant by using it, not by reading or being told. Building a structure like this would have taken time and cooperation. Stones had to be sourced locally, transported without wheels or animals, and lifted into position using ramps, levers, and shared effort. This process would not have been quick or smooth. It likely involved trial, adjustment, and moments of uncertainty. Yet the final result shows confidence, not haste. Over centuries, as the earthen mound eroded and the stone chamber became exposed, the meaning of the place shifted. Folklore developed, including stories that warned against sleeping inside the chamber overnight. These stories, whether believed or not, helped preserve the site by discouraging disturbance. Fear, in this case, protected memory. Standing at Tinkinswood today, the structure does not feel threatening or mysterious. It feels settled, as if it has already endured everything it needed to endure. The weight of the stone above does not create anxiety. Instead, it creates a sense of permanence that is difficult to explain but easy to feel. This is where the journey begins, not with spectacle or grandeur, but with a quiet structure built by people who believed that memory mattered enough to be placed into stone. They left no writing, no names, and no explanations. What remains is the space itself, still doing what it was always meant to do, holding the presence of those who came before and allowing the living to move slowly, calmly, and thoughtfully through time. Cairn of Barnenez, France. The Cairn of Barnenez sits on a narrow peninsula along the northern coast of Brittany, overlooking the calm waters of the Bay of Morlaix. From a distance, it doesn't look dramatic or imposing. It stretches low and long across the land, blending into the landscape rather than rising above it. There's no single focal point, no towering stone meant to draw the eye upward. Instead, the structure feels grounded, heavy, and deliberate, as if it was always meant to be part of this place. Barnenez is one of the oldest large stone monuments ever built by humans. Construction began around 4800 BCE, more than 6,000 years ago. That alone places it far earlier than Stonehenge, earlier than the pyramids of Egypt, and earlier than almost every structure people usually imagine when they think of ancient monuments. What stands here belongs to a much earlier chapter of human life, when farming communities were still learning what permanence meant. What we call the Cairn of Barnenez is actually a massive stone mound, over 70 meters long and built entirely from stacked stone. Inside this mound are multiple stone passage tombs, each with its own narrow corridor leading into a burial chamber. These tombs were not all built at once. They were added gradually, over generations, as the monument slowly grew. This gradual construction is important. Barnenez was not a single event or a single vision carried out in one moment of ambition. It was a long-term commitment. People returned to this place again and again, adding to it, reshaping it, and expanding it over centuries. The monument is less like a building and more like a record of repeated human intention. The passages inside Barnenez are low and narrow. Entering them requires bending down, slowing your movement, and becoming aware of your body in space. Light fades quickly as you move inward, and the stone walls close in. These corridors were not designed for comfort or efficiency. They were designed to guide experience, to separate the outside world from something quieter and more controlled. At the end of each passage is a small stone chamber. These chambers held the remains of the dead, placed there collectively over time. Like Tinkinswood, Barnenez wasn't used for individual burials. Bones were placed, moved, and rearranged as new burials occurred. The dead shared space, just as the living did. Some of the stones inside these chambers are carved with simple symbols, including lines, shapes, and repeated patterns. These markings are subtle and easy to miss. They don't tell stories in the way later art would. Instead, they suggest familiarity, repetition, and shared understanding. These symbols were not meant to be explained. They were meant to be recognized. The location of Barnenez was carefully chosen. The monument faces the sea with long views across the water and the surrounding coastline. This relationship between land and water likely mattered deeply. To the people who built it, the sea was a source of food, movement, and connection, but also a boundary and an unknown. Placing the dead here, overlooking the water, may have carried meanings tied to journey, transition, or continuity beyond the visible world. Building Barnenez required enormous effort. Stone had to be gathered, transported, and stacked without mortar. The scale of the cairn suggests coordinated labor over long periods, but there is no evidence of kings, rulers, or centralized authority directing the work. This was not a monument imposed by power. It was sustained by shared belief and repeated participation. That shared effort tells us something important about these early communities. They were not simply focused on survival. They invested time and energy into places that did not produce food or provide shelter. They built because memory mattered, because continuity mattered, because the relationship between the living, the dead, and the land mattered enough to shape stone itself. Over time, Barnenez fell silent. The passages were sealed. The chambers were left undisturbed. The monument blended further into the landscape, becoming part of the peninsula rather than standing apart from it. Later generations did not reuse it as a tomb. They did not dismantle it. It remained present but inactive, a structure whose purpose had ended, but whose presence endured. In the 20th century, the cairn was damaged during quarrying, and parts of its interior were exposed. Ironically, this destruction revealed the true complexity and age of the monument, allowing archaeologists to understand just how early and how sophisticated it was. What was once hidden inside the mound became visible again, not through ritual return, but through modern excavation. Standing at Barnanez, the feeling is not one of awe in the dramatic sense. It is quieter than that. The monument feels settled, heavy with time rather than mystery. It doesn't demand attention, it absorbs it slowly. The sea moves in the distance, the wind passes over stone, and the structure remains exactly where it has always been. Barnanez shows us that monumentality did not begin with rulers or empires. It began with communities who stayed in one place long enough to care about what came before them and what would remain after them. Long before writing, before metal, before cities, people were already shaping the land to hold memory. This place does not explain itself. It does not offer answers quickly. It simply continues to exist, holding the weight of centuries of human return and allowing the present to pass quietly around it. Castro de Santa Trega. Castro de Santa Trega is located in northwestern Spain, in the region of Galicia, on a hill known today as Monte Santa Trega. The site overlooks the mouth of the Minho River, where it meets the Atlantic Ocean. This position offers wide visibility across river, coastline, and inland territory, making it one of the most strategically placed settlements in the region. The site is known archaeologically as Castro de Santa Trega, and it represents one of the largest and most extensively studied hill forts, or castros, of Atlantic Iberia. Unlike isolated monuments or ritual sites, Santa Trega was a permanent settlement that supported a large population over several centuries. Archaeological evidence indicates that the hill was occupied as early as the late Bronze Age, but the settlement reached its peak during the Iron Age, roughly between the 4th century BCE and the 1st century CE. During this period, Santa Trega expanded into a densely inhabited community with hundreds of stone-built houses distributed across the hillside. The choice of location was deliberate. From Santa Trega, inhabitants could observe movement along the Minho River, which functioned as a major route for travel, communication, and trade. The river connected inland communities with the Atlantic coast, allowing access to marine resources and wider exchange networks. At the same time, the elevated position provided security without complete isolation from surrounding farmland and grazing areas. Unlike later fortified cities, Santa Trega was not built around rigid defensive architecture alone. While stone walls and terraces exist, the settlement's layout reflects long-term habitation rather than emergency refuge. This was a place designed to be lived in continuously, not occupied only during periods of conflict. The remains visible today consist mainly of circular and oval stone houses. These structures were constructed using local granite, with thick walls that provided insulation against the region's wet climate and strong coastal winds. Roofs, which have not survived, were likely made from wood, straw, and turf, forming low, weather-resistant coverings. The houses are arranged in clusters, rather than along straight streets. This organic layout reflects the natural slope of the hill and suggests that construction followed social relationships and practical needs, rather than centralized urban planning. Each cluster likely represented extended family groups or closely connected households. Inside these houses, archaeologists have identified hearths used for cooking and heating, as well as storage areas and workspaces. These were functional domestic structures, not ceremonial buildings. Everyday life unfolded here through repeated routines: preparing food, repairing tools, maintaining shelters, and raising families. The similarity in size and structure of the houses is significant. There's no clear architectural evidence for elite residences or centralized authority buildings. This suggests that Santa Trega operated without strong social stratification, at least as expressed through architecture. Leadership, if present, was likely based on kinship, age, or community consensus rather than permanent institutional power. The scale of the settlement indicates a substantial population. Estimates suggest that, at its height, Santa Trega may have supported several thousand inhabitants. Sustaining a population of this size required reliable access to food, water, and materials, all of which were available within the surrounding landscape. Agriculture played an important role in daily life. Evidence from tools and plant remains suggests the cultivation of cereals, along with animal husbandry involving cattle, sheep, and goats. Fishing and shellfish collection from the nearby coast supplemented inland food production, creating a mixed and resilient subsistence economy. Sanatrega was not isolated from the wider world. Artifacts, recovered from the site, including pottery styles and metal objects, indicate contact with other Iron Age communities across Galicia and beyond. These connections place Sanatrega within a broader Atlantic cultural zone that extended along the western coast of Europe. At this stage, the settlement reflects a balance between stability and openness. People live closely together, shared resources, and maintained long-term occupation, while remaining connected to regional trade and communication networks. The architecture reflects this balance, emphasizing durability and practicality rather than monumentality. As we continue forward, this foundation helps explain how Sanatrega functioned not just as a defensive hilltop, but as a complex living community shaped by environment, economy, and social organization. Shimao. Shimao is located on the edge of the Los Plateau in northern China, in a region that today appears dry, open, and sparsely populated. For a long time, this area was considered marginal in discussions of early Chinese civilization. That assumption changed completely with the discovery of Shimao, a vast stone-built city that predates the earliest dynasties recorded in Chinese history. The site, now known as Shimao, dates to approximately 2300 to 1800 BCE. This places it centuries before the Shang dynasty and challenges the long-held idea that early Chinese urban civilization developed only along the Yellow River Plains. Shimao shows that complex large-scale societies also emerged in regions once thought peripheral. What makes Shimao immediately distinctive is its scale. The city covered more than 4 square kilometers, making it one of the largest known settlements of its time anywhere in the world. At its center stood a massive stepped stone platform, often described as a pyramid-like structure rising above the surrounding city. This central complex was not symbolic alone. It was the structural and social core of the settlement. The city was enclosed by thick stone walls constructed from carefully fitted blocks, a building technique rarely seen in other Neolithic sites in China. These walls were not simple barriers. They incorporated towers, gates, and defensive features that indicate advanced planning and organized labor on a large scale. Unlike many early settlements that relied primarily on rammed earth, Shimao's builders chose stone. This choice required significantly more effort and coordination. Stone had to be quarried, transported, shaped, and fitted precisely. The decision to build in stone suggests both technical capability and a strong desire for permanence. One of the most striking discoveries at Shimao is the presence of jade inlays embedded directly into the city walls and architectural features. Jade was already a highly valued material in Neolithic China, associated with power, ritual, and cosmological meaning. At Shimao, jade was not limited to small objects or burials. It was integrated into the city's architecture itself. These jade pieces were placed deliberately at gates, corners, and key structural points. Their placement suggests that the walls were not only defensive structures but also symbolic boundaries. The city was meant to be protected both physically and spiritually. Excavations have revealed evidence of complex social organization. Residential areas, elite compounds, workshops, and ritual spaces were arranged within the city, indicating functional zoning. This level of organization suggests leadership capable of planning, coordination, and long-term control of resources and labor. Shimao was not a simple village that gradually expanded. It was conceived as a city. Its layout reflects intentional design rather than organic growth. Roads, terraces, and walls were integrated into a coherent plan that shaped how people moved, lived, and interacted. The stepped central platform dominates the site. Rising in tiers, it supported large buildings at its summit, likely used by the ruling elite. From this elevated position, leaders would have had a commanding view of the city below. Architecture here expresses authority through height, separation, and control of space. Archaeological evidence also points to ritual practices that were far from symbolic alone. Human remains found beneath walls and gates suggest ritual sacrifice connected to construction. These practices indicate a belief system in which human life was offered to secure stability, protection, or legitimacy. This aspect of Shimao marks a significant shift from earlier Neolithic societies focused primarily on communal burial and shared ritual. At Shimao, ritual becomes closely tied to power, hierarchy, and urban control. The city's population is estimated to have reached tens of thousands at its height. Supporting such a population required reliable food production, water management, and trade networks. Shimao's location allowed access to pastoral zones, agricultural land, and long distance exchange routes. Artifacts recovered from the site show connections far beyond the immediate region. Materials and styles link Shimao to cultures across northern China and possibly Central Asia. This suggests that the city was part of a wide network of interaction rather than an isolated experiment. At this stage, Shimao represents a fully developed urban center with clear social stratification, advanced engineering, and integrated ritual practice. It does not fit neatly into traditional narratives of early Chinese civilization, which is precisely why it is so important. As research continues, Shimao forces a reevaluation of how and where complex societies emerged in East Asia. It demonstrates that early cities were not confined to river valleys alone, and that stone architecture, hierarchy, and ritual authority appeared earlier and in more diverse contexts than previously believed. This foundation sets the stage for understanding how daily life functioned within Shimao, how power was maintained, and why such a massive city eventually declined and was abandoned. Zorat's Karar. Zorat's Karar is located in southern Armenia, on a windswept plateau not far from the town of Sisian. The landscape here is open and elevated, with distant mountain ranges visible in every direction. At first glance, the site appears simple, a wide scatter of upright stones arranged across uneven ground. There are no walls, no buildings, and no obvious sense of enclosure. Yet this place has drawn sustained attention because of what those stones suggest about early human understanding of space, time, and landscape. The site is also widely known as Karahunge, a name often translated as speaking stones. Archaeologically, it's referred to as Zorat's Karar, and it represents one of the most complex prehistoric stone arrangements in the Caucasus region. Zorat's Karar consists of more than 200 standing stones, many of them large basalt slabs weighing several tons. The stones are not randomly placed. They form lines, arcs, and rough circular patterns that stretch across the plateau. Some stones stand alone, while others are arranged in connected sequences, suggesting that the site developed through multiple construction phases rather than a single event. One of the most distinctive features of Zorat's Karar is the presence of circular holes carved through a number of the stones. These holes are small, carefully shaped, and pass completely through the stone. Their presence immediately sets the site apart from most other megalithic landscapes. The function of these holes has been the subject of long debate. Some researchers have suggested that they were used for astronomical observation, allowing light from the sun, moon, or stars to pass through at specific times. Others argue that the holes may have had acoustic, symbolic, or practical purposes unrelated to astronomy. What is clear is that the holes were deliberately made and required considerable effort, indicating that they served a meaningful function. Dating Zorat's Karar has proven difficult. Estimates range widely, from the Bronze Age to much earlier periods. Some proposals suggest that the earliest phases of the site could date back to the 4th or even 5th millennium BCE, while more conservative interpretations place its main use in the Bronze Age. The lack of organic material directly associated with the stones makes precise dating challenging. Despite this uncertainty, there is strong evidence that the site was used repeatedly over long periods. The variety in stone size, orientation, and arrangement suggests that Zorat's Karar was not built all at once. Instead, it appears to have been modified, expanded, and reused by different communities across generations. The location of the site is significant. The plateau provides wide views of the surrounding landscape, including mountain peaks, river valleys, and open sky. This visibility may have played an important role in how the site was used. Whether for observation, ritual gathering, or territorial marking, the position of Zorat's Karar emphasizes awareness of both land and sky. Unlike settlements or burial sites, Zorat's Karar does not show clear evidence of domestic life. There are no house foundations, hearths, or storage areas. This suggests that the site was not intended for permanent habitation. Instead, it was likely a place people visited for specific purposes, returning periodically rather than living there continuously. The stones themselves were sourced locally. Basalt is abundant in the region, but extracting, shaping, transporting, and erecting stones of this size still required organized labor. This implies coordinated effort and shared intent, even if the site was not controlled by a centralized authority. There's no clear indication of hierarchy expressed through architecture at Zorit's Kara. No single stone dominates the site in scale or placement. Attention is distributed across the landscape rather than focused on a central monument. This suggests that whatever activities took place here were likely communal rather than elite-controlled. Comparisons are often made between Zorit's Kara and other stone arrangements, such as Stonehenge. While such comparisons can be misleading, they highlight a shared human tendency to mark landscapes with stone in ways that go beyond immediate survival needs. Zorit's Kara belongs to this broader tradition, even if its exact purpose remains unresolved. At this stage, Zorit's Kara resists simple explanation. It's not clearly a settlement, a burial ground, or a fortress. Its meaning appears to lie in how it structured movement, attention, and observation within the landscape, rather than in any single function. Understanding Zorit's Kara requires patience rather than certainty. The site does not offer direct answers. Instead, it provides evidence of repeated human engagement with place, stone, and space over long periods of time. This foundation allows us to begin examining how the site may have functioned in practice, how people interacted with it, and why its form continued to matter long after its original builders were gone. Drombeg. Drombeg is located in West Cork, in the southwest of Ireland, overlooking a low coastal landscape shaped by rolling fields, rocky ground, and distant views of the Atlantic. The site sits quietly on a gentle slope, far from major settlements, with no walls, buildings, or obvious signs of long-term habitation nearby. At first glance, it appears simple, a small ring of stones set into the earth. Yet this modest arrangement has made Drombeg one of the most closely studied stone circles in Ireland. The site is formally known as Drombeg Stone Circle, and it dates to the later Bronze Age, around 1100-800 BCE. Compared to large Neolithic monuments, Drombeg is relatively small, measuring about 9 meters in diameter. Its scale is not accidental. The circle was designed for close interaction rather than large gatherings, suggesting that its function was focused and specific. Drombeg belongs to a type known as a recumbent stone circle. One large stone lies horizontally on the southwest side of the circle, flanked by 2 upright stones. The remaining stones form an arc around this central feature. This arrangement is deliberate and consistent with other recumbent circles found in parts of Ireland and Scotland, although Drombeg is the best preserved example in Ireland. The recumbent stone immediately draws attention. It is heavier and more carefully positioned than the other stones, indicating that it was the focal point of the monument. The stone's placement was not chosen for structural reasons alone. Its orientation plays a critical role in how the site functions. One of the most significant features of Drombeg is its alignment with the winter solstice sunset. On the shortest days of the year, the sun sets directly over the recumbent stone, aligning with a distinctive notch on the distant horizon. This alignment is precise enough to suggest intentional design rather than coincidence. This connection to the solar cycle indicates that Drombeg was used, at least in part, as a calendrical marker. For Bronze Age communities, tracking the seasonal cycle was essential. The return of longer days after winter marked survival, renewal, and the promise of future growth. The winter solstice, in particular, carried symbolic importance as the turning point of the year. The stones at Drombeg were sourced locally. The builders selected slabs of sandstone and carefully transported them short distances to the site. While the stones are not enormous by megalithic standards, their erection still required coordination, planning, and shared effort. The circle reflects communal participation rather than elite command. Unlike settlements or burial monuments, Drombeg shows no evidence of domestic activity. There are no house remains, hearths, or storage pits directly associated with the stone circle itself. This suggests that the site was not a place of daily life, but one visited periodically for specific purposes. Archaeological excavations near the circle uncovered the remains of a nearby cooking site, including a fulacht fiad, or burnt mound, and fragments of pottery. These finds indicate that gatherings at Drombeg may have involved food preparation and communal activity. Ritual and daily practice were not sharply separated in Bronze Age life. The scale of the circle suggests that participation was limited to small groups rather than large crowds. This may reflect family groups, local communities, or individuals with specific roles related to ritual or seasonal observance. Drombeg was not designed for spectacle. It was designed for presence. The surrounding landscape reinforces this interpretation. The circle does not dominate its environment. It sits within it. Views outward are wide but calm, with no dramatic peaks or cliffs. The horizon plays an important role, particularly in relation to the solstice alignment, but the site remains grounded and accessible. Unlike earlier Neolithic monuments that emphasized enclosure or burial, Drombeg represents a later tradition in which stone circles served as markers of time and place, rather than repositories for the dead. There's no evidence of human burial within the circle. Its purpose appears to have been observational and ceremonial rather than funerary. The continued interest in Drombeg over time suggests that its alignment and symbolism remain meaningful across generations. Even as Bronze Age societies changed, the stone circle retained its relevance as a point of reference within the landscape. At this stage, Drombeg can be understood as a carefully constructed interface between people, land, and sky. Its stones do not enclose space or direct movement inward. Instead, they frame attention outward, toward the horizon and the changing position of the sun. This foundation allows us to explore how Drombeg functioned during seasonal gatherings, how its design compares to other recumbent stone circles, and what it reveals about Bronze Age belief systems. In Atlantic Europe, Gallic hill forts, across much of modern France, Belgium, Switzerland, and parts of Germany, the landscapes of the late Iron Age were shaped by large fortified settlements, known today as Gallic hill forts. These sites, often referred to by the Roman term oppida, were not simple refuges or temporary strongholds. They were complex, permanent centers of population, trade, and power that defined Gallic society in the centuries before Roman conquest. Gallic hill forts developed primarily between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE. During this period, Celtic-speaking communities across Western and Central Europe underwent significant social and economic change. Population growth, expanding trade networks, and increasing competition between groups all contributed to the rise of large fortified settlements placed on hills, plateaus, and elevated ridges. These hill forts were carefully positioned. High ground provided visibility over surrounding territory, control of trade routes, and natural, defensive advantages. Rivers, valleys, and road networks were often visible from their ramparts. However, elevation alone does not explain their locations. Many hill forts were placed at points that balanced defense with access to farmland, water sources, and communication routes. Unlike earlier prehistoric fortifications, Gallic hill forts were designed for long-term occupation. Archaeological evidence shows dense clusters of houses, workshops, storage facilities, and communal spaces within their walls. These were not emergency refuges used only in times of danger. They were places where people lived year-round. One of the defining features of Gallic hill forts is their construction technique. Many were surrounded by massive defensive walls built using a method known as Murus Gallicus. This type of rampart combined stone, earth, and timber into a strong, flexible structure. Wooden beams were laid horizontally within stone facings and packed with earth and rubble. Iron nails, or clamps, were sometimes used to secure the framework. This construction method made the walls resistant to both collapse and fire. Roman authors, including Julius Caesar, commented on the effectiveness of these fortifications during military campaigns. The walls absorbed impact rather than cracking, and their design made them difficult to dismantle quickly. The presence of such advanced defensive systems indicates organized labor and centralized planning. Building a Murus Gallicus required large numbers of workers, access to timber and stone, and coordinated effort over extended periods. This level of organization suggests leadership structures capable of mobilizing resources across entire communities. Inside the walls, life was structured but not uniform. Excavations at major hill forts such as Bibracte and Alesia reveal a mixture of domestic buildings, craft areas, and open spaces. Houses were typically built from timber and earth rather than stone, with rectangular or oval plans. These structures were practical and adaptable, reflecting everyday needs rather than monumental display. Craft production played a central role in hill fort life. Evidence of metalworking, pottery production, textile manufacture, and tool making has been found at many sites. Iron weapons, agricultural tools, and decorative objects were produced locally, indicating skilled craftsmanship and specialization. Trade connections extended far beyond local regions. Imported goods such as Mediterranean wine, amphorae, fine ceramics, and luxury items have been discovered within Gallic hill forts. These finds demonstrate active participation in long-distance trade networks, linking Gaul to the Mediterranean world. Such trade was not purely economic. It carried social and political significance. Control over trade routes and access to imported goods reinforced the status of local elites. Hill forts became centers where wealth, influence, and authority were concentrated. Despite this concentration of power, Gallic hill forts were not rigidly planned cities in the Roman sense. Their layouts often followed the natural contours of the land. Streets were irregular. Neighborhoods developed organically rather than according to a grid. This reflects a social structure that combined hierarchy with traditional community organization. Religious and ritual practices were also integrated into hill fort life. Sanctuaries, shrines, and ritual deposits have been identified within or near many sites. These spaces were not separated from daily activity. Instead, belief and routine existed side by side, reinforcing shared identity and social cohesion. The scale of some Gallic hill forts was considerable. Major oppida covered hundreds of hectares and supported populations in the tens of thousands. These were among the largest urban centers north of the Alps before Roman rule. Their existence challenges earlier assumptions that Iron Age Europe lacked true urbanism. Gallic hill forts represent societies in transition. They were neither small tribal villages nor fully centralized states. Instead, they reflect a hybrid form of organization, combining local traditions with increasing complexity driven by trade, warfare, and political competition. Understanding Gallic hill forts requires moving beyond the idea of simple fortifications. These sites were hubs of economic activity, centers of power, and expressions of identity tied to land and community. Their walls enclosed not just people, but entire ways of life. Maeshowe. Maeshowe is located on the mainland of Orkney, a group of islands off the northern coast of Scotland. The landscape here is open and exposed, shaped by wind, low hills, and long horizons. Stone dominates the environment, not only in monuments, but in fields, walls, and shoreline. It is within this setting that Maeshowe was constructed, standing quietly among some of the most significant Neolithic sites in northern Europe. The monument known today as Maeshowe dates to around 2800 BCE. It was built by the same Neolithic culture responsible for nearby sites such as Skara the Ring of Brodgar, and the Stones of Stennis. Together, these places form a dense ceremonial and domestic landscape that reflects a highly organized and settled society. Maeshowe is a large chambered tomb built into an artificial mound. From the outside, it appears as a broad, grass-covered rise in the land, with no visible stonework except for a low entrance passage. This design was intentional. Like many Neolithic monuments, Maeshowe was not meant to dominate the skyline. It was meant to blend into it. The entrance passage is long, low, and narrow, extending more than 10 meters into the mound. Entering requires bending and moving slowly, a physical adjustment that separates the outside world from the space within. The passage leads to a central chamber built from massive stone slabs carefully fitted together. The interior chamber is large for its time, with high stone walls and a corbelled roof that rises upward in stepped layers. The precision of the construction is striking. Each stone was shaped and placed with care, creating a stable structure that has remained intact for over 4,000 years. 3 smaller side chambers open off the main chamber, arranged symmetrically. This layout reflects deliberate planning rather than improvisation. The interior space was not simply hollowed out for burial. It was designed to create balance, order, and controlled movement within the monument. Maeshowe's builders possessed a deep understanding of stone construction. The monument was built without mortar, relying entirely on the weight and placement of stone. The corbelled roof distributes pressure inward, preventing collapse and allowing the chamber to rise higher than would otherwise be possible. What sets Maeshowe apart from many other chambered tombs is its precise alignment. The entrance passage is aligned with the setting sun of the winter solstice. For a brief period each year, sunlight travels down the passage and illuminates the back wall of the central chamber. This alignment is not approximate. It is exact enough to demonstrate careful observation of the solar cycle over many years. The winter solstice marked a critical moment in the annual calendar, signaling the return of longer days after the darkest period of the year. For Neolithic communities living at high latitude, this moment carried profound significance. Survival depended on seasonal cycles, and the return of light would have been both practically and symbolically important. Maisho transformed this astronomical event into an architectural experience. Despite its classification as a tomb, evidence for burial at Maisho is limited. Very few human remains were found during excavation, suggesting that the monument may not have functioned primarily as a burial place, or that remains were removed during the later activity. This raises important questions about the purpose of Maisho. Rather than serving solely as a tomb, it may have functioned as a ceremonial space tied to solar observation, ritual gathering, or seasonal events. The structure's scale and precision suggest importance beyond funerary use alone. Maisho's location within the wider Orkney landscape reinforces this interpretation. It sits in close proximity to stone circles and settlements, forming part of a larger network of monuments that structured movement, visibility, and ritual across the land. The monument remained accessible long after its original builders were gone. In the Viking Age, Norse visitors entered Maisho and left inscriptions carved into its stone walls. These runic carvings, dating to the 12th century CE, represent one of the largest collections of runes found outside Scandinavia. The presence of these inscriptions shows that Maisho retained significance across thousands of years. Even as cultures changed, the structure continued to attract attention, curiosity, and meaning long after its original purpose had faded. Maisho stands as a monument that combines architecture, astronomy, and long-term cultural memory. It reflects a society capable of precise observation, large-scale coordination, and symbolic expression through Arbor Low is located in the Peak District of central England, on a high limestone plateau surrounded by open grassland and gently rolling hills. The landscape here feels wide and exposed, with long views in multiple directions and little to interrupt the horizon. It is within this setting that one of Britain's most unusual prehistoric monuments was constructed. The site, known today as Arbor Low, dates to the late Neolithic period, around 3000 BCE. It consists of a large circular earthwork enclosing a stone circle, making it one of the best preserved henge monuments in Britain. Unlike many famous stone circles, Arbor Low is not defined by tall, upright stones. Instead, all of its stones lie flat on the ground. This feature is central to understanding the site. The stones at Arbor Low were originally erected upright and later fell or were deliberately brought down. Whether they collapsed naturally or were intentionally laid flat remains debated, but their current position gives the monument a distinctive appearance. Rather than reaching upward, the stones emphasize enclosure and containment. The henge itself consists of a circular ditch cut into the limestone bedrock, with a bank built from the excavated material. This ditch and bank arrangement defines the sacred space of the monument. Importantly, the ditch lies inside the bank, a defining characteristic of henges that suggests the enclosure was not defensive. Instead, it marked a boundary between ordinary landscape and ritual space. Two entrances pierce the henge bank, aligned roughly northwest and southeast. These openings were carefully positioned and controlled movement into the interior. Entry into Arbor Low was not casual. People approaching the site would have been aware that they were crossing a defined threshold. Within the henge lies a ring of massive limestone blocks, arranged in an oval shape. Some stones weigh several tons. Even in their fallen state, their size and placement indicate that considerable effort was required to quarry, transport, and erect them. The builders selected stone from the surrounding area, shaping and positioning it with care. At the center of the enclosure stands a low mound known as the central cairn. This feature adds another layer of complexity to the site. Excavations have revealed human remains within the cairn, suggesting that Arbor Low was connected to burial practices as well as ceremonial gathering. The relationship between the stone circle, the henge earthwork, and the central cairn suggests that Arbor Low was not built in a single phase. Instead, it appears to have developed over time, with new elements added as the site's role evolved. This long-term use reflects changing ritual needs rather than a fixed, unchanging purpose. Arbor Low's location is also significant. Although it sits on high ground, it is not placed on the most prominent peak in the area. Instead, it occupies a plateau that feels deliberately chosen for openness rather than dominance. The site does not command the landscape in a military sense. It exists within it. The surrounding area contains additional prehistoric features, including burial mounds and field systems, indicating that Arbor Low was part of a wider ritual and settlement landscape. It was not isolated. It functioned as one node within a network of meaningful places. Unlike monuments aligned precisely to solar events, Arbor Low does not show a clear astronomical alignment that can be confidently identified. This has led researchers to suggest that its primary function may not have been calendrical. Instead, the monument may have focused on communal gathering, burial rites, and the reinforcement of shared identity. The scale of the enclosure suggests that it could accommodate large groups of people. This distinguishes Arbor Low from smaller stone circles designed for limited participation. Here, space itself becomes important. The henge creates an interior large, enough for movement, assembly, and repeated activity. At the same time, the fallen stones prevent clear sightlines across the interior, creating a sense of openness combined with fragmentation. This may have influenced how people experience the space, directing attention inward rather than outward. Arbor Low reflects a moment in prehistory when communities invested heavily in shaping the land for reasons that were social and symbolic rather than practical. The monument produced no food, provided no shelter, and offered no defense. Its value lay in gathering, memory, and shared experience. Understanding Arbor Low requires viewing it not as a single-purpose structure, but as a place that accumulated meaning over time. Its form suggests flexibility rather than rigid function, allowing different activities to coexist within the same space. Dharam Rajika Prehistoric Stone Platforms. The Dharam Rajika Archaeological Complex is located near Taxila, in present-day Pakistan, within a region that has served as a crossroads of cultures for thousands of years. This area lies between the plains of the Indus Valley and the mountain routes leading into Central Asia, making it one of the most historically connected landscapes in South Asia. Long before written records described this region, people were already shaping stone and space here in deliberate ways. The site is commonly associated with the later Buddhist stupa known as Dharmarajika, but beneath and around these historic remains lie much older stone platforms and structural foundations. Archaeologically, the location is identified as Dharmarajika, and it represents a layered landscape where prehistoric activity was later incorporated into religious and urban development. The stone platforms found at Dharmarajika are among the earliest constructed features at the site. These platforms are made of carefully arranged stone blocks, leveled and reinforced to create stable, raised surfaces. Unlike domestic structures, they were not designed for everyday living. Their form suggests intentional preparation of space, possibly for ritual, assembly, or symbolic use. Dating these platforms precisely is challenging, as later construction disturbed earlier layers. However, archaeological evidence suggests that some of the stone foundations predate the Buddhist period by many centuries, possibly extending back into the late prehistoric or early protohistoric phases of the region. This places them within a period when permanent architecture was beginning to emerge across South Asia. What makes these platforms significant is their continuity. When Buddhist builders later constructed stupas and monasteries at Dharmarajika, they did not erase the earlier stonework. Instead, they incorporated it. The later religious structures were built directly on top of, or adjacent to, these earlier platforms, suggesting that the site already held importance before Buddhism arrived. This pattern is not accidental. Across many ancient cultures, places that were once significant for one reason often remain significant for others. Dharmarajika appears to follow this pattern, functioning as a sacred or communal location long before it became a Buddhist center. The platforms themselves are simple in form, but substantial in construction. Stone was quarried locally and arranged without mortar, relying on weight and careful placement for stability. This method reflects a practical understanding of stone construction rather than decorative intent. There is no evidence that these platforms supported large permanent buildings during their earliest phase. Instead, they likely served as open surfaces. Such platforms could have been used for gatherings, ritual performances, or ceremonies tied to seasonal or social events. Their elevated nature would have made them visible and symbolically distinct from surrounding ground. The surrounding landscape helps explain this choice. The Taxila region offered access to water, fertile land, and trade routes, but it was also exposed to movement and interaction. Establishing a stable, elevated space within this environment would have created a focal point for community activity. Unlike later monumental architecture, the Dharmarajika platforms do not emphasize vertical dominance. They don't rise high above the landscape. Instead, they create controlled horizontal space. This suggests an emphasis on inclusion and gathering rather than separation or hierarchy. Archaeological finds in the area indicate long-term use of the site. Pottery fragments, tools, and traces of repeated construction suggest that people returned here regularly. This was not a one-time project. It was a place revisited across generations. The later Buddhist use of the site adds another layer of meaning. When stupas and monasteries were built, at Dharmarajika, the choice to reuse existing platforms implies recognition of the site's earlier significance. Sacred geography was inherited, not invented anew. This continuity challenges the idea that religious landscapes appear suddenly. Instead, Dharmarajika shows how meaning accumulates gradually, with each generation building upon what came before. Stone platforms became foundations not only in a physical sense, but also in a cultural one. Dharmarajika should be understood not simply as a Buddhist site, but as a prehistoric landscape of gathering and ritual that was later transformed. The earliest builders left no inscriptions or symbols to explain their intentions, but their construction choices indicate careful planning and shared purpose. Al-Rajajil. Al-Rajajil is located near the modern city of Sakaka in northern Saudi Arabia, within the Al-Jaf region. The surrounding landscape is dry, open, and sparsely vegetated, shaped by desert winds and seasonal change. At first glance, the area appears empty. Yet, rising from this flat terrain is one of the most unusual prehistoric stone complexes in the Arabian Peninsula. The site is known archaeologically as Al-Rajajil. The name Al-Rajajil is often translated as the men, a reference to the tall stone pillars that stand upright across the site, resembling human figures when seen from a distance. These stones form groups rather than a single circle, creating a scattered but deliberate arrangement across the desert floor. Al-Rajajil consists of several clusters of upright sandstone pillars, most of them standing between 2 and 4 meters tall. Many of the stones appear in pairs or small rows, with some clearly aligned in the same direction. The stones are roughly shaped but carefully placed, suggesting intention rather than randomness. Dating the site has been challenging, but most archaeologists place its construction in the late Neolithic period, around the 4th millennium BCE. This dates Al-Rajajil to a time when northern Arabia experienced a much wetter climate than today. Seasonal rainfall supported grasslands, lakes, and mobile pastoral communities rather than the arid desert seen now. Understanding this environmental context is essential. When Al-Rajajil was built, the region was not isolated wasteland. It was part of a network of prehistoric movement routes used by herders, traders, and early communities who depended on seasonal migration and shared resources. The standing stones themselves were carved from local sandstone. Quarrying, shaping, transporting, and erecting stones of this size would have required coordinated effort. While the stones are not finely dressed, their vertical placement shows a clear understanding of balance and stability. Unlike later monumental architecture, Al-Rajajil does not form a closed enclosure. There are no walls, no defined interior space, and no obvious central monument. Instead, the site spreads outward, allowing movement between stones rather than directing people inward. This layout suggests that Al-Rajajil was not a settlement or a defensive structure. There's no evidence of domestic activity such as hearths, storage pits, or housing remains directly associated with the stones. The site appears to have served a different purpose altogether. One of the most striking aspects of Al-Rajajil is the orientation of the stones. Many are aligned roughly north-south, while others follow slightly different axes. This has led to ongoing debate about whether the site had an astronomical function, possibly related to solar observation or seasonal tracking. Some researchers suggest that the stones may have marked important times of year linked to migration, rainfall, or animal movement. Others argue that the alignments may be symbolic rather than scientific, reflecting shared cultural concepts rather than precise observation. At present, there's no definitive evidence to confirm an astronomical function. What can be said with confidence is that the orientation of the stones was deliberate. Their placement follows patterns that cannot be explained by chance alone. Another possibility is that Al-Rajajil functioned as a ceremonial or territorial marker. In mobile societies, fixed landmarks play an important role. They mark gathering points, boundaries, and shared spaces where groups come together temporarily rather than live permanently. The human-like appearance of the stones may have been intentional. Standing upright, paired, and facing similar directions, they create a visual impression of presence. This may have reinforced social memory, identity, or ancestral association within the landscape. Unlike burial monuments, Al-Rajajil has not yielded human remains. This suggests that its role was not funerary. Instead, it may have been linked to gathering, ritual, or social coordination among dispersed communities. The long-term preservation of the site is partly due to its abandonment rather than reuse. As the climate became drier and population shifted, Al-Rajajil was left behind. No later culture built directly on top of it, allowing the stones to remain standing for thousands of years. Today, the site offers rare insight into prehistoric life in Arabia before desertification reshaped the region. It challenges the idea that early monument building was limited to Europe or the Near East. Al-Rajajil demonstrates that communities across Arabia were also shaping stone landscapes in deliberate and meaningful ways. Al-Rajajil should be understood as a place of repeated human attention rather than permanent occupation. Its stones mark presence, memory, and shared understanding in a landscape that once supported movement rather than settlement. Dwarfy Stane. The Dwarfy Stane is located on the island of Hoy in Orkney, Scotland, set within a broad valley surrounded by low hills and open moorland. Unlike many prehistoric monuments in Orkney, this site is not part of a dense ceremonial landscape. It stands alone, isolated from other major structures, and immediately feels different from stone circles, chambered tombs, or settlements found elsewhere in the islands. The site is known archaeologically as Dwarfy Stane. It consists of a single massive block of sandstone that has been hollowed out from the inside to create an interior chamber. Rather than being built from multiple stones, the monument was carved directly from a natural boulder, making it unique in northern Britain. The boulder itself measures over 8 meters in length and more than 4 meters in height. From the outside, it appears unremarkable, resembling many other large stones scattered across Orkney's landscape. The significance of the Dwarfy Stane becomes apparent only when approaching its carved entrance. A small rectangular opening leads into the interior. This entrance would originally have been sealed with a fitted stone door, now lost. Passing through the opening reveals a narrow chamber carved entirely from the solid rock. Inside, the space is divided into 2 compartments with stone benches carved along the sides. The carving required careful planning and sustained effort. Hollowing out such a large stone using stone tools would have taken considerable time. The builders needed to understand how to remove material without weakening the structure, ensuring that the chamber remained stable and usable. The interior layout suggests that the Dwarfy Stane functioned as a tomb. The stone benches are consistent with burial platforms found in other Neolithic chambered tombs across Orkney. However, unlike those monuments, which are built from multiple stones and covered by mounds, the Dwarfy Stane relies entirely on excavation rather than construction. This difference is significant. It shows that Neolithic communities were not limited to one architectural solution. Instead, they adapted their methods to available materials and local conditions. In this case, a large natural boulder became the monument itself. Dating the Dwarfy Stane precisely has proven difficult, but most researchers place its creation in the Neolithic period, around the same time as Maeshowe and other chambered tombs in Orkney. The similarities in internal layout support this interpretation. Despite this, the Dwarfy Stane lacks some features common to other Neolithic tombs. There is no surrounding mound, no extended passage, and no evidence of repeated communal use. This has led to debate about whether it served a broader community or a more specific, possibly individual, purpose. Very few human remains have been recovered from the site, leaving its exact use uncertain. It may have held a small number of burials, or it may have served a symbolic or commemorative role, rather than a purely funerary one. The isolation of the Dwarfy Stane reinforces this uncertainty. Unlike monuments placed near settlements or ritual centers, this site sits apart from daily life. Reaching it requires deliberate effort. This separation suggests that the location itself was meaningful. The surrounding landscape offers little shelter and wide visibility. Wind moves constantly across the valley, and weather changes quickly. In this setting, the solid, enclosed interior of the Dwarfy Stane creates a strong contrast with the open environment outside. Later history adds another layer to the monument. In the 19th century, the interior walls were marked with Persian inscriptions carved by a traveler who visited the site. These markings are unrelated to the monument's original purpose, but they demonstrate how the Dwarfy Stane continued to attract attention long after its prehistoric use had ended. Folklore surrounding. The site often describes it as the dwelling of dwarves or supernatural beings. These stories reflect the monument's unusual form and isolated position. While not historically accurate, such legends indicate that the site retained a sense of otherness in local memory. From an archaeological perspective, the Dwarfy Stane challenges common assumptions about Neolithic monument building. It shows that early communities were capable of sophisticated rock-cut architecture, not just stone assembly. It also suggests that variation in form may reflect variation in social practice. The dwarfy stain can be understood as a deliberate departure from typical monument design. Whether used for burial, remembrance, or symbolic purposes, it represents a different approach to shaping stone in space. Creevykeel Court Tomb. Creevykeel Court Tomb is located in County Sligo, in the northwest of Ireland, positioned at the foot of Brickleave Mountains and overlooking a low, open plain. The site sits close to modern farmland and roads, yet the landscape retains a sense of openness that reflects its ancient past. From this position, the tomb connects mountain, plain, and sky in a way that feels deliberate rather than accidental. The monument is known archaeologically as Creevykeel Court Tomb and dates to the early Neolithic period, around 3500 BCE. It belongs to a distinctive group of monuments known as court tombs, which are among the earliest stone-built burial structures in Ireland. These tombs represent a crucial phase in the transition from mobile hunter-gatherer life to settled farming communities. Creevykeel is composed of two main elements: an open stone-paved forecourt and a long cairn containing burial chambers. The forecourt is semicircular in shape and defined by upright stones arranged to create a formal entrance space. Unlike later passage tombs, this area was not enclosed or hidden. It was meant to be entered, occupied, and used by groups of people. This open court is one of the defining features of the monument. It suggests that activity at Creevykeel involved the living as much as the dead. Rituals, gatherings, and ceremonies likely took place here, with participants standing together in a shared space before approaching the burial chambers beyond. Behind the court lies the cairn, a long mound of stone that encloses two burial chambers arranged side by side. These chambers are formed by upright slabs supporting massive capstones. The stones were sourced locally and carefully selected for size and stability. Their placement shows an understanding of weight distribution and structural balance. Excavations at Creevykeel revealed cremated human remains, along with fragments of pottery and stone tools. These remains were placed collectively, not individually. As with many Neolithic tombs, burial here was not a single event. The chambers were reopened and reused over time, reinforcing a long-term relationship between the community and the monument. The presence of cremation is significant. It suggests that the treatment of the dead involved transformation, rather than simple deposition. Fire played a role in funerary practice, possibly symbolizing purification, release, or transition. The remains placed in the tomb were already altered before burial. The court tomb tradition emphasizes visibility and participation. Unlike later monuments that restrict access through narrow passages, Creevykeel allows open approach. This openness indicates that death and remembrance were communal experiences rather than private or elite-controlled rituals. The tomb's orientation also matters. The open court faces roughly east, toward the rising sun. While not aligned with a specific solstice event, this direction reflects a broader symbolic association with light, renewal, and beginnings. For early farming communities, the daily return of sunlight was closely tied to survival and seasonal cycles. Creevykeel's location within the wider Sligo landscape places it among one of the densest concentrations of Neolithic monuments in Ireland. Nearby sites include passage tombs, cairns, and standing stones, indicating that this region held long-term ritual significance. Creevykeel was not isolated. It was part of an established sacred landscape. Despite its scale and complexity, there's no evidence that Creevykeel was built by a centralized authority or ruling elite. The monument reflects cooperative labor rather than imposed power. Its construction would have required coordination, time, and shared belief, but not hierarchy expressed through architecture. The stones themselves are unadorned. There are no carvings or decorative motifs. Meaning was created through form, space, and repeated use, rather than visual symbolism. The court defined where people gathered. The chambers defined where the dead were placed. Together, they structured social behavior. Over time, Creevykeel fell out of use. The cairn partially collapsed, stones shifted, and soil accumulated. Later communities did not reuse the tomb for burial or construction. Instead, it remained present as a feature of the landscape, gradually becoming part of local memory rather than daily life. Modern excavation in the 20th century revealed the structure and clarified its age and function. What archaeologists uncovered was not just a burial monument, but evidence of one of the earliest expressions of communal ritual architecture in Ireland. Creevy can be understood as a place where early farming communities gathered to negotiate life, death, and continuity together. Its open design reflects a worldview in which remembrance was shared, visible, and repeated rather than hidden away. Menorca Taula. On the Mediterranean island of Menorca, scattered across open fields and low hills, stand a series of stone monuments unlike anything found elsewhere in Europe. They are simple in form, yet immediately distinctive. A tall vertical stone supporting a horizontal slab, creating a T-shaped structure. These monuments are known as taulas, and they belong to a prehistoric tradition unique to this island. Archaeologically, these monuments are associated with the Talaiolic culture, which developed on Menorca during the late Bronze Age and Iron Age. The taulas were constructed roughly between 1000 and 300 BCE, a period when island societies across the Western Mediterranean were becoming increasingly complex and interconnected. The best-known examples are found at sites such as Torralba d'en Salord, Talati de Dalt, and Torre d'en Galmé. The taulas are not isolated stones. Each one stands within a defined enclosure, often shaped like a horseshoe and built from large limestone blocks. This enclosure creates a controlled interior space, separating the taula from the surrounding landscape. Entry into these sanctuaries was deliberate, passing through narrow openings rather than open approaches. The taula itself consists of two massive limestone slabs. The vertical stone can reach more than 4 meters in height, while the horizontal stone rests precisely on top. The balance required to place the upper slab is considerable, especially given the absence of metal tools or lifting machinery. This indicates careful planning, coordinated labor, and practical understanding of stone construction. Unlike stone circles or passage tombs, taulas do not form part of burial monuments. Excavations have revealed no human remains directly associated with the taula structures themselves. Instead, the evidence points toward ritual or ceremonial use, rather than funerary function. Within the enclosures, archaeologists have found animal bones, pottery fragments, and traces of fire. These remains suggest that activities at the taula sanctuaries involved offerings, food preparation, and repeated gatherings. The presence of cattle bones is particularly notable, as cattle appear to have held symbolic importance within Talaiolic society. The orientation of the taulas has been studied extensively. Many are aligned roughly toward the south, although not with the same precision seen in monuments designed specifically for solar observation. This has led researchers to suggest that the taulas were not primarily astronomical instruments, but rather symbolic focal points within ritual space. Interpretations of the taulas vary. Some scholars have proposed that they functioned as altars or supports for offerings. Others suggest they represented abstract symbols, possibly linked to deities, ancestors, or cosmological concepts. One long-standing theory connects the taulas to bull worship. Based on the presence of cattle remains and the overall form of the monuments, what is clear is that the taulas were central to communal ritual life. They were not domestic structures, nor were they defensive. Their construction required significant effort without providing practical benefit, indicating that their value lay in shared belief rather than utility. The Talaiolic culture that built these monuments lived in stone villages characterized by circular houses and large towers known as talayots. These communities practiced agriculture, animal husbandry, and trade with other Mediterranean cultures, including Phoenicians and later Carthaginians. The taulas emerged within this broader social and economic context. Despite external contacts, the taula tradition remained distinctly local. No similar monuments appear on neighboring islands or mainland regions. This suggests a strong cultural identity expressed through architecture. The repetition of the taula form across Menorca indicates shared ideas about ritual space and symbolic structure. The placement of taula sanctuaries within settlements also reveals their importance. They were often positioned near the center of communities, accessible but distinct. This placement suggests that ritual activity was integrated into daily life, rather than separated from it. Over time, the use of taulas declined. By the Roman conquest of the Balearic Islands in the 1st century BCE, the Talaiolic cultural system began to change. New religious practices and architectural forms replaced older traditions, and the taula sanctuaries fell out of use. Because later cultures did not reuse these structures extensively, Many taulas remain standing where they were built. Their survival allows archaeologists to study not just their form, but their spatial relationship to settlements and landscapes. The taulas of Menorca can be understood as purpose-built ritual monuments that anchored communal belief. They don't explain themselves through decoration or inscription. Their meaning was enacted through repeated use, gathering, and shared understanding. Temple of Kam Ambo. The Temple of Kam Ambo stands on a bend of the Nile in Upper Egypt, positioned on a low rise overlooking the river. Unlike many major Egyptian temples that align tightly with cardinal directions or dominate large urban centers, Kam Ambo occupies a more transitional space. It sits between desert and water, between regional trade routes, and between different religious traditions that overlapped in this part of Egypt for centuries. The site is known historically and archaeologically as the Temple of Kam Ambo, and most of the visible structure dates to the Ptolemaic period, roughly between the 2nd century BCE and the early Roman era. However, the significance of Kam Ambo didn't begin with the stone temple that survives today. Evidence suggests that this location was considered sacred long before monumental construction took place. What immediately distinguishes Kam Ambo from other Egyptian temples is its dual design. The temple is symmetrical along its main axis, effectively divided into two parallel halves. Each half is dedicated to a different deity. On one side is Sobek, the crocodile god associated with the Nile, fertility, and unpredictable natural power. On the other is Horus the Elder, a sky god linked to kingship, protection, and cosmic order. This dual dedication is rare in Egyptian temple architecture. Most temples focus on a single primary deity, sometimes accompanied by consorts or divine families. At Kam Ambo, the architectural symmetry reflects an intentional balance between two contrasting forces: chaos and order, water and sky, danger and protection. The layout reinforces this balance. Two entrances lead into parallel courtyards. Two sets of halls and sanctuaries mirror one another. Even relief carvings were duplicated, with each god receiving equal architectural emphasis. This was not symbolic decoration alone. It structured how worshippers moved through the temple and how ritual activity was organized. The choice of Sobek as a primary deity is closely tied to the local environment. Crocodiles were once common in this stretch of the Nile, and they posed a real threat to river traffic and daily life. Rather than viewing crocodiles solely as dangers, local belief systems transformed them into divine manifestations that could be appeased and honored. Excavations near the temple have uncovered crocodile mummies, confirming that Sobek was actively worshipped here. These animals were ritually preserved and buried, reflecting a relationship between humans and the Nile that acknowledged both dependence and fear. Horus the Elder, by contrast, represented stability, kingship, and protection. His presence balanced Sobek's more unpredictable nature. Together, the two deities formed a religious system that addressed the realities of life along the Nile: fertility and flood, danger and control, survival and order. The temple's reliefs provide insight into how ritual and medical knowledge intersected at Kam Ambo. One of the most famous carvings depicts surgical instruments, including forceps, scalpels, and tools resembling those used in later periods. While interpretations vary, these reliefs suggest that Kam Ambo may have functioned as a healing center, as well as a place of worship. The proximity of the Nile was central to the temple's role. The river was Egypt's lifeline, providing water, food, transport, and fertile soil. Kam Ambo's elevated position protected it from flooding while maintaining direct access to river traffic. This location made it a natural stop for travelers moving between Upper Egypt and Nubia. Architecturally, the temple follows many conventions of Ptolemaic Egyptian design. Columns are decorated with floral capitals, walls are covered in carved reliefs, and inscriptions record offerings, rituals, and royal patronage. Yet despite these familiar elements, the temple's symmetry gives it a distinctive character. Construction at Kam Ambo was not completed in a single phase. Work continued over generations, and parts of the temple were modified or expanded under Roman rule. This prolonged development reflects the site's ongoing importance rather than a single moment of imperial ambition. Like many Nile-side temples, Kam Ambo suffered damage over time from flooding, stone reuse, and later settlement. Portions collapsed, and building material was removed for other projects. What remains today is only part of the original complex, but enough survives to clearly convey its unusual design and purpose. The Temple of Kam Ambo should be understood as a regional religious center, shaped by local conditions rather than imperial ideology alone. Its architecture reflects compromise, balance, and adaptation rather than rigid cosmic alignment. Huaca del Sol. Huaca del Sol is located on the north coast of Peru, near the modern city of Trujillo, in the fertile Moche Valley. The site lies between the Pacific Ocean and the Andean foothills, a region shaped by rivers that cut through desert terrain and make large-scale agriculture possible. This landscape, defined by both abundance and vulnerability, supported one of the most influential civilizations of ancient South America. The monument is known archaeologically as Huaca del Sol, and it was constructed by the Moche civilization between approximately 100 and 450 CE. At its height, Huaca del Sol was one of the largest adobe structures ever built in the Americas, forming part of a broader ceremonial and urban complex that also included Huaca de la Luna nearby. Huaca del Sol is not a stone monument. It is built almost entirely from adobe bricks made of mud, sand, and organic material. This choice reflects both environmental conditions and cultural practice. Stone was scarce in the valley while clay-rich soils were abundant. The Moche mastered adobe construction, using it to create massive, durable architecture suited to a dry coastal climate. The scale of Huaca del Sol is difficult to grasp from ground level. The structure rises in stepped terraces, forming a massive pyramid that once dominated the valley floor. Archaeological estimates suggest that more than 130 million adobe bricks were used in its construction. Each brick was made by hand, shaped, dried, and carried into place by human labor. Many of these bricks bear makers' marks, simple symbols or impressions left by different groups of workers. These marks are significant because they suggest organized labor drawn from multiple communities. Rather than a single centralized workforce, construction appears to have been carried out through a system of communal obligation, with groups contributing bricks as part of social or political duty. Huaca del Sol was not built all at once. It was expanded and rebuilt over generations, with new layers added on top of earlier ones. This process transformed the structure gradually, reflecting shifts in political power, ritual practice, and social organization within Moche society. Unlike pyramids in other parts of the world, Huaca del Sol was not a tomb. No royal burials have been found within its core. Instead, the structure appears to have served administrative, ceremonial, and possibly residential functions for Moche elites. Its elevated terraces would have provided both visibility and separation from the surrounding population. The location of Huaca del Sol was carefully chosen. It sits near the Moche River, which provided water for irrigation systems that supported large-scale agriculture. Control of water was central to Moche power. Floods caused by El Niño events could bring both fertility and destruction, making environmental management a critical political concern. Archaeological evidence suggests that Huaca del Sol functioned as a center of authority where decisions related to resource distribution, labor organization, and ritual activity were coordinated. Its size and prominence made it a visible symbol of power in a society without writing or metal tools. The Moche civilization is known for its sophisticated art, particularly ceramic vessels depicting scenes of ritual, warfare, and sacrifice. These images provide context for understanding Huaca del Sol. They show a society structured around hierarchy, religious authority, and controlled violence, with elites playing central roles in ceremonial life. Although Huaca del Sol was a political and ceremonial center, it was not isolated from everyday life. Surrounding the monument were residential areas, workshops, and agricultural fields. The pyramid formed part of a living urban landscape rather than standing alone as a symbolic structure. Spanish conquest had a devastating impact on the site. In the 16th century, colonial authorities diverted the Moche River in search of gold rumored to be hidden within the pyramid. This act caused severe erosion, washing away large portions of Huaca del Sol and permanently altering its shape. Much of what once existed was destroyed before systematic archaeological study began. Despite this damage, the remaining structure still conveys the original scale and ambition of the monument. Its eroded sides expose layers of adobe construction, offering rare insight into how the Moche built and rebuilt their ceremonial architecture over time. Huaca del Sol represents a different approach to monumentality than stone-built temples or tombs. Its power lies not in permanence through material, but in scale through repetition. Millions of small, fragile bricks were combined to create something enduring enough to shape an entire society. Moyar Guda Dolmen. Moryar Guda is located in the Deccan region of southern India, within present-day Karnataka, an area marked by rocky hills, dry scrubland, and seasonal watercourses. The landscape is scattered with granite outcrops that emerge naturally from the ground, shaping how people have interacted with this terrain for thousands of years. Within this setting lies one of the lesser-known but archaeologically significant megalithic landscapes of South Asia. The site is identified as Moryar Guda Dolmen, and it belongs to a broader tradition of megalithic burial architecture found across peninsular India. These monuments are generally dated between roughly 1500 BCE and 500 BCE, although precise dating varies between sites due to limited organic material for analysis. The dolmens at Moryar Guda are constructed using large granite slabs, arranged to form box-like chambers. Typically, 4 upright stones support a massive capstone, creating an enclosed space beneath. The stones were quarried locally, selected from the surrounding outcrops, and moved short distances into position. The scale of individual dolmens is not extreme, but the cumulative effort required to build multiple structures is considerable. Each slab weighs several tons, and positioning them accurately would have required coordinated labor, shared planning, and practical knowledge of balance and leverage. No mortar was used. Stability depends entirely on careful placement. Many of the dolmens include a circular opening, often called a porthole, cut into one of the upright slabs. This feature is common in South Indian megalithic architecture and has been the subject of ongoing interpretation. The openings are too small for full entry by an adult, suggesting that they were not intended as access points for the living. Archaeological excavations at similar dolmen sites indicate that these chambers were used for burial or secondary burial. Cremated remains, pottery fragments, iron, tools, and ornaments have been found in comparable contexts. The porthole may have served as a symbolic passage, allowing offerings to be placed inside or representing a transition between the world of the living and the dead. The placement of the dolmens across the hillside is not random. Structures are positioned with awareness of slope, visibility, and surrounding rock formations. Some dolmens face open ground, while others are oriented toward specific landscape features. This suggests that location was an important consideration, not merely convenience. Unlike later temple architecture in India, these dolmens do not emphasize axial symmetry or monumental approach. There are no processional paths, no enclosing walls, and no defined central focus. Each dolmen functions as an individual unit, yet together they form a shared funerary landscape. There's no evidence of permanent settlement directly associated with the dolmens themselves. Domestic structures, hearths, and habitation. Layers are typically located at some distance. This separation indicates that the dolmen field was not part of daily living space, but a place visited for specific purposes. The communities that built these structures practiced mixed subsistence, combining agriculture, animal husbandry, and seasonal movement. Iron tools found in megalithic contexts suggest technological capability, while burial goods point to social differentiation, though not rigid hierarchy. Importantly, dolmen burials in South India do not appear to be limited to elite individuals alone. The repetition of similar structures across wide areas suggests a shared funerary tradition, rather than exclusive monuments for rulers or priests. Memory and ancestry were expressed through repetition rather than scale. Environmental factors also shaped the design of the dolmens. Granite is durable and abundant in this region, making it a logical material choice. The dry climate helped preserve stone structures, allowing many to survive with minimal collapse over long periods. Later activity at Moryar Guda appears limited. Unlike some megalithic sites that were reused or incorporated into later religious practice, these dolmens were largely left undisturbed. This absence of reuse has helped preserve their original form and layout. The lack of inscriptions or iconography means that interpretation relies entirely on form, context, and comparison. These structures do not explain themselves. They reflect a cultural practice that emphasized containment, separation, and permanence without visual narrative. Within the broader South Indian megalithic tradition, Moryar Guda represents a regional expression rather than an isolated phenomenon. Similar dolmen fields appear across Karnataka, Telangana, and Tamil Nadu, forming a widespread cultural pattern rather than a localized experiment. At this point, Moryar Guda can be understood as part of a long-lived funerary system that balanced individual remembrance with communal tradition, using durable materials to mark presence within the landscape, rather than to dominate it. The dolmens remain fixed in place, shaped by human intention but deeply integrated into the natural terrain, offering insight into how early Iron Age communities in southern India understood death, memory, and space. Gavrini's Passage Tomb. Gavrinis is located on a small island in the Gulf of Morbihan, off the southern coast of Brittany in western France. Today, the island is accessible only by boat, surrounded by calm tidal waters and low wooded shoreline. During the Neolithic period, however, the relationship between land and sea here was different. Sea levels were lower, and the island may have been connected to the mainland or reachable by short crossings, making it part of a broader inhabited landscape rather than an isolated point. The monument is known archaeologically as the Gavrini's Passage Tomb, and it dates to approximately 3500 BCE. It belongs to the same monumental tradition as other Neolithic passage tombs in the Morbihan region, including Barnanez and Lokmariaker. But Gavrini's stands apart because of the extraordinary decoration preserved within its interior. From the outside, Gavrini's appears as a low, circular mound of earth and stone. The structure does not dominate the island visually. Its form is compact, contained, and intentionally understated. As with many Neolithic tombs, the significance of Gavrini's is not apparent from its exterior. It is revealed only through entry. A narrow stone passage leads inward from the edge of the mound toward a small burial chamber at the center. The passage is low and enclosed, requiring visitors to bend and move slowly. This physical restriction is deliberate. It controls pace, posture, and awareness, separating the outside environment from the interior space. The passage is lined with large upright stone slabs, known as orthostats. Nearly every one of these stones is carved with complex engraved designs. Spirals, arcs, zigzags, chevrons, lozenges, and interlocking curves cover the surfaces. These carvings are not superficial. They are deeply cut and carefully executed, indicating sustained effort and skill. The density of decoration at Gavrini's is exceptional. No other passage tomb in Europe contains such a continuous sequence of carved stones along its passage. The carvings are not confined to the chamber. They accompany the movement inward, appearing stone after stone, guiding the eye along the corridor. The motifs themselves are abstract. There are no clear human figures, animals, or narrative scenes. Interpretation has therefore focused on pattern, repetition, and placement rather than representation. Some researchers have suggested that the carvings reference movement, water, cycles, or sound. Others view them as symbolic systems tied to belief rather than depiction. What is clear is that the carvings were not meant to be seen all at once. The narrow passage and low light would have limited visibility. As someone moved through the tomb, carvings would emerge gradually, partially illuminated by torchlight. This suggests that experience, rather than display, was central to the monument's design. The chamber at the end of the passage is small and enclosed, formed by a massive stone slab supporting a large capstone. The capstone itself is carved, although much of its decoration is not easily visible from within the chamber. Notably, archaeological study has shown that this capstone was originally part of a much larger standing stone that was broken and reused. Other stones at Gavrini's also appear to have been reused from earlier monuments. When carvings are examined closely, some are found to be oriented sideways or upside down, relative to their original position. This indicates that stones with existing symbolic importance were deliberately incorporated into the tomb. This reuse is significant. It suggests continuity rather than replacement. Older monuments were not erased, but transformed. Their material and symbolic value was carried forward into new architectural forms. Very little human material was found inside Gavrini's during excavation. Only a small number of fragmentary remains were recovered, along with a few artifacts. This suggests that the tomb may not have served as a long-term burial site in the same way as other passage tombs. Instead, Gavrini's may have functioned primarily as a ceremonial or symbolic space, with burial playing a limited or secondary role. The emphasis on carved stone, controlled movement, and sensory experience supports this interpretation. The island setting reinforces this idea. Reaching Gavrini's required intentional travel. Participation would have been restricted to those who knew the location and had the means to reach it. This suggests that access was controlled and that the monument served a specific group rather than an entire regional population. The construction of Gavrinis required substantial coordination. Large stones had to be transported, shaped, engraved, and erected. The carvings alone represent an enormous investment of time and labor. This was not functional architecture. It was symbolic architecture at a high level of sophistication. The Morbihan region contains one of the highest concentrations of megalithic monuments in Europe. Gavrinis must be understood within this broader context, where stone construction, ritual practice, and landscape modification were central to social life. At the same time, Gavrinis represents an extreme within that tradition. Its interior decoration suggests a level of symbolic elaboration not seen elsewhere. This may reflect a specific role within the regional ritual system rather than a general burial function. Later history did not overwrite Gavrinis. The monument was sealed and left largely undisturbed, which helped preserve its carvings. When it was rediscovered and studied in the 19th century, its interior was found in remarkably intact condition. Today, Gavrinis provides rare insight into Neolithic symbolic expression. It shows that early farming communities were not only capable of large-scale construction, but also of sustained abstract thought expressed through stone. The passage does not explain its carvings. There's no key, no guide, no inscription. Meaning emerges through repetition, movement, and presence within the space, rather than through explicit representation. The structure remains fixed within the island, shaped by human intention but inseparable from its maritime setting, offering a view into how Neolithic communities combined architecture, symbolism, and landscape into a single, carefully controlled experience. Chimu Walls of Chanchan. Chanchan is located on the north coast of Peru, near the modern city of Trujillo, in a region where the Pacific Desert meets fertile river valleys. This landscape appears harsh and dry, yet it has supported large human populations for centuries through carefully managed irrigation systems. Within this environment, the Chimu civilization built the largest city ever constructed in adobe. The site is known archaeologically as Chanchan, and it served as the capital of the Chimu state from around 900 to 1470 CE. At its height, Chanchan covered more than 20 square kilometers and housed tens of thousands of inhabitants. Unlike many ancient cities defined by stone or fired brick, Chanchan was built almost entirely from sun-dried adobe. One of the most striking features of Chanchan is its system of massive perimeter walls. These walls do not surround the city as a single enclosure. Instead, they define a series of large rectangular compounds known as ciudadelas. Each ciudadela functioned as a self-contained architectural unit, enclosed by thick adobe walls that could reach up to 10 meters in height. The walls served multiple purposes. They controlled movement, separated spaces, and expressed authority. Entry points were narrow and carefully managed, directing traffic into long corridors rather than open plazas. This layout limited visibility and restricted access, ensuring that movement within the city followed prescribed paths. The surface of the walls is decorated with repeating relief designs pressed into wet adobe. These motifs include stylized fish, waves, pelicans, nets, and geometric patterns. The repetition of these images is deliberate and consistent, covering long stretches of wall without variation. These designs reflect the Chimu worldview. The sea played a central role in Chimu life, providing food, trade routes, and symbolic meaning. Unlike highland Andean cultures that emphasize mountains and sky deities, the Chimu focused heavily on maritime imagery. The walls of Chanchan functioned as visual expressions of this relationship. The reliefs were not carved after construction. They were formed as part of the building process, using molds to press designs into fresh adobe. This method allowed for standardization across large surfaces and suggests centralized planning and control over artistic production. The walls also reflect social hierarchy. Each ciudadela is believed to have been associated with a Chimu ruler. When a ruler died, the compound continued to function as a ceremonial and administrative center, while a new compound was built for the next ruler. This practice led to the expansion of Chanchan over time rather than redevelopment of existing space. Inside the walls, each ciudadela contained plazas, storerooms, burial platforms, and administrative areas. These were not residential neighborhoods for the general population. Instead, they functioned as elite centers where goods were stored, rituals were performed, and authority was exercised. The general population lived outside these compounds in less formal residential zones made of simpler adobe structures. This spatial division reinforced social structure. Walls were not only physical barriers, they were expressions of separation between rulers and subjects. between administration and daily life. Construction of the walls required immense labor. Adobe bricks were produced in vast quantities using local soil, water, and organic material. Like other Andean societies, the Chimu relied on organized labor systems rather than paid workforces. Communities contributed labor as part of social obligation to the state. The durability of adobe in this environment depended on climate. The dry coastal conditions allowed walls to survive for centuries with minimal rainfall damage. However, when heavy rains associated with El Niño events occurred, erosion could be severe. Maintenance would have been a constant concern. Chanchan's walls were not defensive in the military sense. They lack features such as battlements or strategic vantage points. Instead, their height and thickness emphasize separation and control, rather than protection from external attack. This distinction is important. The Chimu state maintained power through administration, resource control, and ideology rather than constant warfare. The walls organized space internally, shaping how people experienced authority within the city. Archaeological evidence shows that the walls were periodically repaired, modified, and rebuilt. New reliefs replaced older ones, and entrances were altered as needs changed. This indicates that Chanchan was a dynamic city, rather than a static monument. When the Inca conquered the Chimu in the late 15th century, Chanchan lost its political role. The city was gradually abandoned, and its walls began to erode. Later Spanish colonial activity accelerated this process through looting and neglect. Despite this, the remaining walls still convey the scale and intent of Chimu architecture. Long corridors, high enclosures, and repeating imagery shape movement and perception even in ruin. At this stage, the walls of Chanchan can be understood as instruments of organization rather than defense. They structured power, controlled access, and expressed identity through material and imagery. Their presence defines Chanchan not simply as a city, but as an administrative landscape built to manage people, resources, and belief through architecture itself. Nurage su Nuraxi. Nurage su Nuraxi is located near the modern village of Barumini in south-central Sardinia, an island positioned between mainland Italy, North Africa, and the western Mediterranean. Sardinia's interior is shaped by rolling plains, basalt plateaus, and low hills, offering wide visibility and access to agricultural land. Within this landscape stands one of the most complex and best preserved examples of a type of structure found nowhere else in the world. The site is known archaeologically as Nurage su Nuraxi, and it dates primarily to the Bronze Age, beginning around the 16th century BCE. Su Nuraxi is the most elaborate example of a nurage, a form of megalithic tower unique to Sardinia, built by the Nuragic civilization over many centuries. At its core, Su Nuraxi consists of a massive central stone tower constructed from large basalt blocks laid without mortar. The tower originally rose to several stories in height, forming a truncated cone shape. The stones were carefully selected and fitted, relying on weight and balance rather than binding material. This method allowed the structure to remain stable for thousands of years. The interior of the central tower contains corbelled chambers stacked vertically, connected by narrow stairways built into the thickness of the walls. These spaces were enclosed, dark, and deliberately controlled. Movement within the tower was restricted, suggesting that access was limited and purposeful rather than casual. What distinguishes Su Nuraxi from simpler nuragi is its expansion over time. Surrounding the central tower is a complex system of 4 additional towers connected by thick walls, forming a fortified bastion. This arrangement transformed the original tower into the core of a larger defensive and administrative structure. Beyond the bastion lies an extensive village of stone huts, built in circular forms and clustered around the central complex. These domestic structures indicate long-term habitation rather than temporary occupation. People lived, worked, and organized their daily lives around the nurag, rather than simply using it as a refuge. The scale of construction at Su Nuraxi reflects sustained effort over generations. Building such a complex required coordinated labor, planning, and access to resources. The basalt used for construction was sourced locally, but quarrying, transporting, and stacking stones of this size demanded significant organization. Despite its fortress-like appearance, Su Nuraxi was not purely a military structure. There is limited evidence of large-scale warfare at the site. Instead, the architecture suggests a multifunctional role combining defense, administration, storage, and symbolic authority. The Nuragid dominated the surrounding landscape visually. From the upper levels of the towers, inhabitants would have had clear views across the plain, including nearby settlements and movement routes. Visibility reinforced control, not only over territory but also over social activity within the community. Archaeological finds from the site include pottery, tools, metal objects, and evidence of food production. These materials indicate a mixed economy based on agriculture, animal husbandry, and trade. Sardinia's position in the Mediterranean allowed contact with Mycenaean, Cypriot, and later Phoenician cultures. The Nuragic civilization did not leave written records, making interpretation dependent on material evidence. What emerges from Sunaraxi is a society that invested heavily in durable architecture as a means of organizing space and authority. The repeated construction and modification of the site over centuries suggests that Sunaraxi adapted to changing social conditions. New walls were added, towers reinforced, and village areas expanded as population and needs evolved. Importantly, Sunaraxi does not appear to have been the residence of a single ruler, in the way later palaces functioned. Instead, it likely served as a communal center where leadership was expressed through control of space, resources, and ritual, rather than through permanent royal occupation. Water management played a role in the site's design. Wells and cisterns were incorporated within the complex, ensuring access to water during dry periods. This practical feature also enhanced the site's resilience and strategic value. As Sardinia entered the Iron Age and later came into contact with Phoenician and Roman powers, the role of Nuragi changed. Some were abandoned, others repurposed, and many gradually fell out of use. Sunaraxi, however, remained prominent enough to preserve much of its structure beneath collapsed stone. Modern excavation revealed the complexity of the site, uncovering layers of construction that demonstrate long-term continuity rather than a single building phase. What is visible today represents only part of the original height and extent of the complex. Within the broader Nuragic landscape, Sunaraxi stands as a central example of how architecture functioned as a social anchor. The stone towers did not simply provide shelter or defense, they structured community life, defined territory, and embodied shared identity. The arrangement of towers, walls, and surrounding village illustrates a system where power was embedded in construction itself, rather than displayed through decoration or inscription. Sunaraxi remains fixed within the Sardinian plain, its massive stone forms continuing to shape movement, visibility, and space, in the same way they once did for the people who built and lived around them. Lycian rock tombs. The Lycian rock tombs are found along the southern coast of modern-day Turkey, carved into steep limestone cliffs overlooking river valleys, ancient cities, and the Mediterranean Sea. This region, known in antiquity as Lycia, was defined by rugged terrain, narrow coastal plains, and natural routes connecting Anatolia to the wider eastern Mediterranean. The tombs are among the most visually striking funerary monuments of the ancient world, not because of scale alone, but because of how directly they're integrated into the landscape. Archaeologically, these monuments are identified as the Lycian rock tombs, and they date primarily from the 5th to the 4th centuries BCE. They were created by the Lycians, an Anatolian people with their own language, political traditions, and artistic identity, existing alongside but distinct from Greek and Persian cultures. The tombs are carved directly into vertical rock faces, often at considerable height above ground level. Reaching many of them would have required ladders or scaffolding during construction, indicating careful planning and significant effort. Their elevated placement was intentional, ensuring visibility from below and separation from everyday activity. What immediately distinguishes Lycian tombs is their architectural form. Many are carved to resemble wooden houses, complete with pitched roofs, beams, doors, and architectural details rendered in stone. This imitation of domestic architecture suggests that the tombs were conceived as houses for the dead, rather than abstract monuments. The facades replicate construction methods used in Lycian timber buildings, even though the tombs themselves are stone. This translation of wood architecture into rock implies a desire to preserve familiar forms beyond death, maintaining continuity between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Internally, the tombs are relatively simple. Most contain a single chamber with stone benches or platforms on which bodies were placed. Some tombs were used for multiple burials, reopened over time as additional individuals were interred. Grave goods, including pottery, jewelry, and personal items, accompanied the dead, although many tombs were looted in antiquity. The placement of tombs above cities such as Myra, Kaunos, and Telmessos reflects social structure. Not everyone was buried in rock-cut tombs. These monuments were reserved for elite families or individuals of status. Visibility played a role in this distinction. Tombs carved high into cliffs could be seen from great distances, reinforcing memory and lineage. In Lycian belief, the location of burial mattered. Ancient sources and archaeological interpretation suggest that Lycians believed the soul was carried to the afterlife by winged beings. Elevating the dead above ground may have symbolized this journey upward, closer to sky and movement. This belief helps explain why tombs were not placed underground, as in many other cultures, but raised into cliffs. Stone cliffs became transitional spaces between earth and sky, suitable for housing the dead during their passage. Not all Lycian tombs follow the same design. Some are simple chambers with plain facades, while others are elaborately carved with columns, reliefs, and inscriptions. This variation reflects differences in status, period, and local tradition rather than a single standardized form. Inscriptions carved near tomb entrances provide rare insight into Lycian society. Written in the Lycian language, these texts often record names, family relationships, and warnings against disturbance. They indicate a strong emphasis on ancestry and ownership of burial space. The tombs were not isolated structures. They formed part of urban landscapes. From below, the living city and the city of the dead were visually connected, reinforcing continuity between generations. Death was present but elevated, visible yet separate. The carving process itself required skilled labor. Stonecutters had to remove large volumes of rock while maintaining structural stability. Mistakes could not be corrected easily. This level of craftsmanship indicates specialized knowledge passed down through generations. The choice of limestone was practical. It is relatively soft when freshly cut, allowing detailed carving, but hardens over time when exposed to air. This made it suitable for both construction and long-term preservation. Over time, Lycian cities came under Persian control, and later Hellenistic influence. Architectural styles began to change, and freestanding tombs inspired by Greek temples appeared alongside traditional rock-cut forms. Even so, the rock tomb tradition continued, suggesting strong cultural continuity. Roman rule eventually transformed burial practices further, but many Lycian rock tombs remained intact, their elevated positions protecting them from reuse or destruction. Their survival is partly due to their inaccessibility. Today, the tombs dominate the visual identity of ancient Lycian sites. They define skylines, shape visitor movement, and frame how these landscapes are experienced. Their presence is inseparable from the cliffs themselves. Rather than standing apart from nature, the Lycian rock tombs are embedded within it. The cliff face becomes architecture, and architecture becomes landscape. The tombs reflect a worldview in which memory, status, and belief were expressed through placement rather than enclosure, through visibility rather than concealment, and through continuity rather than separation. La Bastida defensive structures. La Bastida is located in southeastern Spain, in the region of Murcia, set on a steep hill overlooking a narrow valley. The terrain here is dry and rugged, marked by sharp slopes and limited arable land. This landscape does not invite casual settlement. Its selection reflects careful consideration of visibility, access, and control rather than comfort or abundance. The site is known archaeologically as La Bastida, and it dates primarily to the early Bronze Age, around 2200 to 1550 BCE. La Bastida is associated with the Elargar culture, a society that emerged in southeastern Iberia during this period and developed levels of social organization and conflict previously unknown in the region. What distinguishes La Bastida from other contemporary settlements is the scale and sophistication of its defensive architecture. The settlement is enclosed by massive stone walls, reinforced with towers, gates, and engineered barriers. These features were not symbolic. They were designed to resist organized attack. The main defensive wall follows the contours of the hill, forming an irregular enclosure adapted to the natural slope. In places, the wall reaches several meters in thickness. Large stone blocks were laid in courses, reinforced with rubble and earth, creating a structure capable of absorbing impact. At key points, the wall incorporates projecting towers. These towers allowed defenders to observe approaches, control entry routes, and create overlapping fields of view. Their placement indicates an understanding of tactics rather than simple enclosure. The entrance to La Bastida was tightly controlled. Access points were narrow, indirect, and exposed to defenders positioned above. Anyone entering the settlement would have been visible and vulnerable. This design reflects anticipation of hostile encounters rather than generalized precaution. Inside the walls, space was limited. Buildings were tightly packed, following the slope of the hill in step terraces. This density suggests that protection was prioritized over expansion. Living within the walls meant accepting constrained conditions in exchange for security. The construction of these defenses required coordinated labor and centralized planning. Quarrying stone, transporting it uphill, and assembling complex walls demanded sustained effort. This level of organization implies leadership capable of mobilizing and directing large groups. Archaeological evidence from La Bastida indicates social differentiation. Burials beneath houses contain weapons, metal objects, and prestige goods associated with certain individuals. This suggests the presence of a warrior elite whose authority may have been tied directly to control of the fortified settlement. The Alargar culture is notable for its early use of bronze weapons, including daggers and spearheads. The defensive structures at La Bastida must be understood in this context. The settlement reflects a society where violence and the threat of violence were integral to social organization. Unlike earlier Iberian communities, which relied primarily on natural defensibility or small-scale barriers, La Bastida represents a shift toward engineered fortification. The walls were not simply obstacles. They were components of an integrated defensive system. The choice of hilltop location amplified this system. Steep slopes limited access routes, forcing any approach into predictable paths. Defenders could exploit gravity, height, and restricted movement to their advantage. Water management was also incorporated into the site's design. Cisterns and controlled drainage ensured access to water during periods of siege or drought. This suggests that the settlement was designed to withstand prolonged isolation if necessary. The interior architecture reflects functional priorities. Houses were modest, constructed from stone and mud brick. With limited decoration, space was used efficiently. Storage areas indicate accumulation of resources, possibly controlled by elites. La Bastida was not a temporary refuge. It was a permanent settlement structured around defense. Its inhabitants lived with the walls as a constant presence, shaping movement, visibility, and daily routine. The emphasis on fortification suggests a broader regional context of instability. Competition for resources, territory, or status likely drove the need for such defenses. La Bastida appears to have been both a stronghold and a center of power. Archaeological analysis shows that the defenses were maintained and modified over time. Walls were reinforced, entrances adjusted, and structures rebuilt. This ongoing investment indicates that security concerns persisted across generations. Eventually, La Bastida was abandoned. The reasons are still debated, but environmental stress, social upheaval, or shifts in power may have played a role. When the site was left, its defenses remained, preserving a record of early organized warfare in Western Europe. The defensive structures at La Bastida challenge earlier views of Bronze Age Iberia as relatively peaceful. Instead, they reveal a society capable of large-scale construction, driven by the realities of conflict and control. Within this landscape, architecture functioned as a tool of survival and authority, embedding power directly into stone and terrain. The walls continue to define the hill today, shaping how the site is approached and understood, much as they once structured the lives of those who built and depended on them. Cairn of Barnenies. The Cairn of Barnenies stands on a low promontory overlooking the Bay of Morlaix in Brittany, western France. From this position, the monument faces both land and sea. Situated within a landscape shaped by tides, granite outcrops, and long coastal horizons. Today, the structure appears massive and unmistakable. In the Neolithic period, it would have been even more striking, dominating its surroundings through scale alone. The site is known archaeologically as the Cairn of Barnenies and dates to approximately 4500–4000 BCE. This places it among the oldest known monumental stone structures in Europe, predating Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids by many centuries. Barnenies is not a single tomb, but a long cairn measuring over 70 meters in length. Within this massive stone mound are at least 11 passage tombs, each with its own entrance, corridor, and burial chamber. These chambers were built at different times, indicating that the monument developed in stages. rather than as a single construction project. The cairn is constructed primarily from granite and dolerite blocks quarried locally. These stones were stacked carefully without mortar, relying on weight and placement for stability. The sheer volume of material involved is significant. Thousands of tons of stone were moved, shaped, and assembled, requiring sustained communal effort over generations. Each passage tomb within the cairn follows a similar basic plan. A narrow corridor leads inward from the exterior to a small chamber. Movement through these passages is constrained. Visitors would have needed to bend or crawl, slowing entry and emphasizing transition from outside space to interior enclosure. Inside the chambers, stone slabs form walls and roofs, creating enclosed spaces designed to contain both bodies and activity. Excavations have revealed human remains, pottery, stone tools, and carved symbols within several chambers, indicating repeated use rather than single burials. Some of the stones inside Barnanez are engraved with abstract motifs, including zigzags, cup marks, and geometric patterns. These carvings are less extensive than those at Gavrinis, but they demonstrate that symbolic marking of stone was already established at this early date. The placement of multiple tombs within a single cairn suggests collective burial practices. Rather than dedicating individual monuments to specific persons, communities invested in a shared structure that accumulated meaning over time. The cairn grew as new chambers were added, extending both physically and socially. The orientation of the passages varies slightly, but many face toward the southeast or south. While not aligned with a single astronomical event, these orientations reflect consistent attention to light and direction. Sunlight would have entered the passages at certain times of day, creating changing interior conditions. Barnanez's coastal location is significant. During the Neolithic period, the sea was not a boundary, but a route. Coastal and riverine travel connected communities across Brittany and beyond. The cairn's visibility from water may have been as important as its presence on land. The scale of Barnanez indicates a high degree of social coordination. Organizing labor for such a project required shared purpose, planning, and leadership. Yet there is little evidence of rigid hierarchy expressed through the monument itself. No chamber is dramatically larger or more elaborate than the others. This suggests that authority may have been distributed or negotiated rather than centralized. The monument reflects collective identity rather than individual dominance. Its power lies in accumulation rather than singular display. Barnanez was not isolated. It belongs to a dense network of Neolithic monuments across Brittany, including passage tombs, standing stones, and alignments. These sites together formed a ritual landscape structured by movement, memory, and repeated visitation. Later history nearly erased the cairn. In the 20th century, part of Barnanez was used as a quarry, damaging several chambers. Archaeological investigation halted this destruction and revealed the monument's true age and complexity. The partial damage also exposed construction details, allowing researchers to study how the cairn was built and modified. Different building phases are clearly visible, showing changes in technique and layout over time. What emerges from Barnanez is evidence of long-term commitment. The cairn was not completed quickly or abandoned after a single use. It remained active across generations, adapting as communities changed. The chambers do not present a single narrative or image. Meaning was produced through repetition, through return, and through shared engagement with a structure that continued to grow. The cairn's mass anchors it firmly in place. It does not invite movement across it, but rather movement into and around it, shaping how people approach death, ancestry, and memory. Barnanez stands as an early example of how architecture was used to organize social relationships long before urban centers or written systems existed. The monument remains embedded in its coastal setting, its stone form continuing to structure space, visibility, and movement, much as it once did for the communities that built and expanded it.